and welcome to Dialogue. China-EU relations play a crucial role in the global business landscape as they together account for over one-third of the world's GDP. Despite the ups and downs in bilateral relations in 2024, discussions are going on to secure a better balance between competition and cooperation. How should China and the EU better manage their increasingly complex ties? And what's the prospect of China's economy following the recent stimulus package? And what should the future of globalization look like? Join us for discussion today from Beijing. I'm Xu Qianduo. Joining me today is Yanis Varoufakis, former finance minister of Greece. Welcome to Dialogue, Yanis.
Thank you for having me.
Well, if you look at China-EU relationship, of course, it's about 800 billion euros, and China is the largest partner of goods, second only to the U.S. We talked about interdependence, but then people look at the other side, or people see things differently. They would increasingly say, oh, there's over-dependence on China, there's vulnerability, there's, let's say, probably trade deficit issues outstanding. How do you look at the relationship now?
Purely in geopolitical and not trade-related terms. Let us not forget that the European Union didn't raise a single issue regarding its trading relationship with China until it was told to raise an issue by the United States. It was only after Donald Trump in 2017, 2018 started the new Cold War against China that Brussels was given instructions effectively to question its trade links with China. You remember the ban of Huawei or the imposition by Washington, D.C. upon Brussels to begin decoupling from Huawei. And then when Joe Biden won in 2020, and instead of reversing Donald Trump's, his great enemies, political enemies policy of a Cold War against China, Joe Biden amplified the Cold War against China and essentially gave Europeans their marching order to start questioning the relationship with China. And let us not forget that if it wasn't for China, after the 2008 great financial crisis, Germany would have had very, very serious problems because soon after 2008, not only the banks of Germany went bankrupt, but also Germany lost its export markets in the rest of Europe, in countries like mine, in Greece or in Italy, in Spain, because of the Great Depression and the austerity-fueled recession in Europe. It was only China that came through and increased massively China's importation of German commodities and German cars, German goods and services that Germany, that allowed Germany to stabilize. So in short, all those issues that are being brought out now about over the reliance on China, on the question of a trade surplus that China has vis-a-vis the European Union, those are all made up explanations for the fact that politically, Europe is utterly dependent on the United States, and the United States decided to tell Europe to slow down, if not to damage its trading relationship with China.
You did write a piece in late 2023, basically pointing out that the EU needs China much more than China needs the US, but it's restrained by the US in its relationship with China. And now, of course, we have a new government upcoming in Washington, Donald Trump's second term. Are we seeing more possible restraint on EU's relationship with China? Or, how will this Trump's new presidency affect China-EU relationship?
From the perspective of Donald Trump, the European Union is just as much of a threat in his mind, whether he's right or not. I'm not commenting on that. But from Donald Trump's perspective, the European Union is a clear and present danger to the United States as much as China is. Indeed, during the election campaign, Donald Trump went so far as to describe the European Union as a mini China. In other words, as a mini version of the Chinese threat to the United States. But then immediately, in the same sentence, he hastened to add, well, not so mini after all. What that means is that it is clear that while advocating huge tariffs to be slapped onto Chinese imports into the United States, at the same time, he's talking about anything between 10 and 20% of tariffs being slapped on European trade, on European exports to the United States. So the question, of course, is, and everybody's discussing this, and I'm not going to speculate on what exactly is going to happen. I'm just stating it for the benefit of our audience. The discussion is whether he really wants to impede international trade to that extent, or whether he's escalating by threatening tariffs of up to 100% for Chinese goods and 20% for European goods in order to strike two separate deals, one with China and one with the European Union.
Let's continue with the China-EU relationship here. And we do have, for example, specific issues. One of them, of course, is a tariff on the Chinese EVs and possible Chinese countermeasures, trade tensions. People are talking about that. I mean, how serious is the issue here?
Well, it is very serious for Europe because we have been here in Europe, we've been proclaiming the need for the green transition, which when it comes to road transport, that means electric vehicles. But we're not capable of building them in sufficient quantities and at sufficiently low prices. Why? Because Europe has failed to invest generally, not just on electric vehicles. Over the last 15 years, we've had the lowest level of investment in the history of Europe since, the beginning of capitalism 200 years ago. And therefore, on the one hand, we proclaim the need for the green transition, that we need electric vehicles, we need solar panels, we need wind turbines, but we can't produce them. China can produce them, and yet under the command of Washington, D.C., of the United States, you have Brussels actively imposing tariffs and trying to reduce the amount of importation of these green technologies, which we can't manufacture ourselves in Europe, which China can manufacture, which we need, and now the United States are not allowing us to import. So it is, I would call it a tragedy, except that, as a Greek, I won't abuse this term because tragedy is far more important than what we are doing here, which is just an act of idiocy, really.
Mm-hmm. Let's have a short break. We'll be back right after this.
What's behind the next door? What motivates us to find the truth? To understand the world, we must see it from different angles. Never stop searching. Go deeper. Go further. Be open-minded. Be engaged. Open the door through dialogue, where ideas do matter.
You might think you are better informed in an information age. The fact is, people are more often misled by misinformation. You might think every voice is heard in a digital world. The fact is, many nations and peoples are still underrepresented. And data poverty shuts out many. We at CGTN are committed to transcending the information gap and the digital divide. CGTN, bridging nations and civilizations. CGTN, see the difference.
Welcome back. Well, of course, at the same time, China has proposed this the new quality productive forces, meaning basically with a focus on innovation, science and technology, at the same time upgrading the traditional industries. What is what does China fare in that respect? Also, long term, how productive that will be.
Well, science and technology and innovation is essential. It is necessary, but it is not sufficient because you can have a lot of productive capacity and a lot of productivity gains, which are, as I said, necessary. But you also need to look after aggregate demand, the capacity of society, the society that produces these innovations and these commodities and these services that are laden with innovative and research-based advances, the capacity of society to be able to consume them, to have the effective demand, as John Maynard Keynes described it, in order to have it. My personal view, if I'm allowed to canvass one, is that China should very seriously consider a basic income for its population, especially given that you have a remarkably interesting experiment going on in the People's Bank of China, in the central bank, with a digital currency. It is perfectly possible to balance the increase in the productive capacities of the Chinese economy with an increase in aggregate demand, which relies on a basic income that is generated through your digital currencies.
Well, I think many people would agree with you that consumption is important, not only the manufacturing capacity, however productive that is. At the same time, of course, you want to, for any nation, you want to upgrade your production chain to improve the quality in terms of innovation, in terms of manufacturing. If you look at the World Innovation Index report 2024, for example, China ranks number one for the second consecutive years in terms of the number of global top 100 science, technology, and innovation clusters. So how do you look at the Chinese, let's say, development or growth in that respect, innovation, science and technology, for example, EV and other clean energy technologies?
There's no doubt that not only is innovation and a scientific a revolution in production necessary for a country like China, for any country for that matter, but moreover, China has been remarkably successful. The electric vehicle market is a miracle. Never before has a country managed using its own resources, to essentially mature a new sector like electric vehicles within 5 years, which is what has happened in the case of China. So, while Donald Trump and Ursula von der Leyen are slapping, desperately trying to stem the flood of high-quality, inexpensive Chinese electric vehicles into Europe and the United States, using rather unconvincing arguments about state aid and about dumping. The reality is that these electric vehicles are the result of a vertically integrated supply chain, which incorporates not only materials, human labor, technical expertise, but also remarkable new innovations. So China needs to be complimented on this, and I do compliment China and Chinese engineers and companies on this. At the same time, when you have this spurt of productivity and this spurt of innovation, you need to ensure that you do not become a hostage to the inimical responses to these exports going to the United States and to Europe by European and American bureaucrats and politicians. This is why it's important to be able to consume within China a large part of the output of this remarkable, technologically innovative industrial sector.
Well, that's true. China is making efforts in an all-around way. China is investing overseas, for example, with the latest opening of this Shanghai megaport in Peru, and the growth, I would say, rapid growth of trade between China and the Latin American countries. And also China is welcoming more foreign investment into its market by basically removing all the restrictions in the manufacturing sector. I mean, as I said, this is meaningful because not only for China, but also for the world, given this influence. Also this global atmosphere of rising protectionism, right? But of course, it depends on the interactions with other countries too. In that respect, how do you look at, say, the Chinese overseas investment or Chinese embrace of foreign investment into its own market there?
Well, you've got to remember that it's perfectly capable of growing your trade, growing your exports in a balanced way, with a balanced trade situation, in equilibrium. Ideally for China, you would want to build ports in places like Peru, to construct factories for electric vehicles and other advanced commodities in Europe, in Africa, and so on, while at the same time increasing your importation, not only of foreign capital, but also of foreign goods. So ideally, China should be aiming at a balanced balance of payments between itself and especially the global south. Because let's face it, if you have net exports in relation, let's say, to India or to Argentina or to Brazil, then you have a problem with your currency, because it means that you will be importing also those foreign currencies, if you want to decouple from the dollar. And then the question is, what do you do with those currencies once you accumulate them within China? So it is essential to separate the problem of net exports, which is always recessionary within your country. This is something we must remember. When a country like, for instance, take Germany, which has been having, they're the champions of net exports. And the other side of the same coin of net exports is the recessionary austerity effect of those net exports on their own working class, on their own population. So you want China to grow its income, its production, its science, research and development, innovation, its exports to the rest of the world, while increasing simultaneously its imports, because that will be essential for raising the living standards of the people of China.
Yeah, improving the living standard of China, of course, the priority of the Chinese government. At the same time, we do see China invest, for example, in infrastructure projects around the world, and the Belt and Road Initiative. You have this Prius port in Greece, for example. You have this Shanghai port in Peru, and also railways, highways. People see that as necessary, in particular in developing countries. At the same time, of course, it's criticized for creating this so-called death trap for developing world. I mean, the Belt and Road Initiative is continuing, and how do you look at that? The prospect and the usefulness of investment in infrastructure.
I'm on record for many years now, more than 10 years, supporting the Belt and Road Initiative, supporting it not on behalf of China, but on behalf of logic and human decency in the United States, in Europe, and so on. I would add two caveats, though. The Belt and Road Initiative and Chinese investment in effectively public infrastructure in other countries needs to be augmented by two features which are not particularly present at the moment. One is, you mentioned debt. Whenever you lend money to a country, to a company, to a society, like China has lent to African countries, to various countries in Asia and so on, even some European ones, as part of the Belt and Road Initiative. You must already have designed within that contract, that loan agreement, a mechanism for restructuring the debt, because debts always need to be restructured. This is one fundamental truth since the beginning of humanity. Debts cannot be sacred. They need to be restructured according to the circumstances. If the returns to a capital project, whether it's a bridge or an electricity system or a port, when the returns fall below the projected returns, then there needs to be a debt restructure. Otherwise, the debtor enters a debtor's prison. And this is the criticism that China must overcome, especially in view of the fact that Western imperialism has always destroyed countries through indebting them. From the 19th century onwards, and today this is a process which is overseen by the International Monetary Fund, debt has been used in order to imprison in a debt prison various peoples and populations. Look at what happened to my country, look what happened to Argentina, and so on and so forth. You do not want China to acquire the image of a country that's simply repeating this. I don't believe China is repeating this, but it is important to demonstrate that it is not by including clauses for debt restructuring. And for instance, let me give you an example of GDP indexed repayments. So imagine a project where Chinese capital is funding it, and imagine that the repayments are pro rata in proportion to the returns from that project. Then there will be absolutely no grounds on accusing China of using debt in order to manipulate countries. That's the one thing that is missing and should be added to the Belt and Road Initiative. The second thing, it should be an engagement with the local population. Because when Chinese companies move into, like the port of Piraeus or in Ethiopia, the local population, you have to understand, is deprived. These are places where there has been a lot of social discontent. So even if the Chinese company does its job brilliantly, it creates a wall, behind that wall, it builds what it's meant to build, the infrastructure, and keeps it to itself. That creates a kind of distance with the local population. And that distance can be manipulated into enemies of good relations between our countries and China by inspiring nationalism, local nationalism against China. Mm-hmm. So, good local engagement with the working class of the areas where Belt and Road initiatives are being built. That's my recommendation.
Yeah, I mean, wonderful advice, I guess. Of course, there's good intention, there's the investment in infrastructure, those infrastructure embraced by the governments, by the people, but still there's a need to improve in terms of consideration, in terms of how to probably help operate such project, a long-term point of view, and also engage the locals for the Chinese companies there. And of course, we talked about trade, investment, bank loans, big project there, part of globalization, let's say, at least in the traditional sense. But back in 2018, you pointed out basically we need I'm not sure whether it's the right characterization of your idea, like a new globalization, because the old way of globalization is no longer viable. And our solutions, quote, must be internationalist. Talk more about that.
Well, globalization is not internationalism. Globalization is the internationalization of capital. So if you go to the Mexico-United States border, you will see the ugliness of globalization. You will see an ugly fence that prevents Mexicans and Latin Americans from stepping into the United States. So this is the opposite of globalization, right? People are not allowed to move. Mm-hmm. They are fenced in like chickens, like prisoners. And while they're waiting there, hoping to cross the border for a better life, in a place where they can find jobs and better security, there are openings in this wall, and one truck after the other crosses the border with goods. And simultaneously, as we know, you don't see that because it happens in the ether, but money, billions and billions and billions or trillions, travel across the world at the touch of a button. So globalization is the freedom of money and commodities and the unfreedom of human beings to internationalize. Internationalism focuses on humanity, focuses on our capacity to move freely, for the Chinese to come to Europe, for the Europeans to go to America or to Latin America, for Latin Americans to come to China and to come to Europe. And also it means international solidarity. Solidarity with the many, not with the few. Globalization is solidarity with the very few against the interests of the many. So as progressives, I'm speaking as a Marxist, let me be clear on this. For us, Marxists, the logo that motivates us is workers of the world unite. It's not workers of the world erect borders and stop each other from moving around. And it's not, we care about ourselves and not about the others. It's about looking at humanity as one family and ordering our business and our finances, our ecological projects in order to maintain the capacity of the human family.
Speak of breaking down the barriers, where China has policy of unilateral visa-free treatment for many countries, including many European countries. That's, let's say, bring people together easier.
Well, absolutely. And you know what? You may not like what I'm going to say, but I think China should introduce a permanent mechanism for importing migrants into China. Countries that have a demographic problem should open our borders, and that includes my country, Greece, to foreigners. Because our cultures, the Chinese culture, the Greek culture, are extremely powerful cultures. So you should never fear that foreigners will come in and dilute your culture. The opposite is going to happen. The people who come to China to settle and to work and to be productive and be good citizens will become the best Chinese of the future. In the same way here in Greece, over the last 2 millennia at least, the best Greeks ended up to be the ones who came from other lands to settle here.
Well, that's also the idea discussed by the Chinese intellectuals. We will see what will happen. Thank you, Yanis. With that, we come to the end of today's discussion with Mr. Yanis Varoufakis. You can also watch us on the CGTN app on YouTube. I'm Xu Qinduo. Thanks for being with us. See you next time.